Ed Sullivan stood in the control booth at Studio 50, watching the Doors run through their sound check. It was September 17, 1967, and Ed had a sick feeling in his stomach that wouldn't go away. Jim Morrison, the band's lead singer, was sprawled on the stage floor, eyes half closed, looking like he might pass out at any moment. Ed's producer leaned over and whispered, "He's stoned out of his mind. We should cancel them right now." But Ed shook his head. The Doors had the #1 song in America with Light My Fire, and canceling them would be a ratings disaster. What Ed didn't know yet was that in exactly 48 hours, Jim Morrison would do something on live television that would get the Doors banned forever and create one of the most infamous moments in broadcast history. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when rock and roll's most dangerous frontman looked Ed Sullivan in the eye and chose chaos over compromise. To understand why Jim Morrison was a ticking time bomb on The Ed Sullivan Show, you need to understand what the Doors represented in 1967. They weren't just another rock band. They were dark, psychedelic, dangerous. While the Beatles sang about holding hands and the Beach Boys sang about surfing, the Doors sang about death, violence, and getting high. Jim Morrison called himself a shaman, a poet, an agent of chaos, and he meant it. Light My Fire had spent 3 weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts, but the song had a problem. One line in particular, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." The word higher was an obvious drug reference, and in 1967, with the Summer of Love happening in San Francisco and parents across America terrified that their children were all becoming drug-addicted hippies, that one word was enough to get a song banned from radio. CBS had received complaints about the song. Sponsors were nervous, and Ed Sullivan's Standards and Practices Department had made it very clear if the Doors performed on the show, Jim Morrison had to change that lyric. "Girl, we couldn't get much higher" had to become "Girl, we couldn't get much better," or something equally harmless. No drug references. No controversy. Clean, family-friendly entertainment. Ed's talent coordinator, Bob Precht, who was also Ed's son-in-law, had been assigned the task of getting the Doors to agree to the lyric change. Bob had met with the band's manager 3 days before the show and laid out CBS's requirements. "It's simple," Bob had said. "Change one word. That's all. Say better instead of higher and everyone's happy." The band's manager had promised to talk to Jim Morrison. But when Bob followed up the next day, the manager's voice was strained. "I talked to Jim. He's resistant to the idea. He feels like it's censorship, artistic compromise. He's not sure he can do it." Bob had felt his blood pressure rising. "Not sure he can do it. It's one word, one syllable. Tell him if he doesn't agree to change it, the Doors are off the show." There was a long pause. "Bob, I'll be honest with you. Jim doesn't respond well to ultimatums. In fact, ultimatums tend to make him do the opposite of what you want. Let me work on him. I'll get him to agree." But now it was Sunday afternoon, less than 6 hours until showtime, and Jim Morrison still hadn't confirmed that he would change the lyric. Ed watched Jim on stage during the sound check, moving in that strange serpentine way he had, his voice low and hypnotic. The other band members, Ray Manzarek on keyboards, Robbie Krieger on guitar, and John Densmore on drums, seemed nervous. They kept glancing at Jim, trying to gauge his mood. Ed walked down from the control booth onto the stage. Jim was sitting on the floor now, his head tilted back, staring at the ceiling. "Jim," Ed said, his voice sharp. "We need to talk, now." Jim slowly brought his head forward and looked at Ed. His eyes were glazed, unfocused. "Ed Sullivan, the great American gatekeeper. What do you want to talk about?" "You know exactly what I want to talk about," Ed said. "The lyric, higher. You need to change it to something else. Anything else. This isn't negotiable." Jim smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Everything's negotiable, Ed. That's what America's all about, right? Freedom of speech. Freedom of expression." "Not on my show it isn't," Ed snapped. "My show has standards. 50 million people watch, including children. I'm not going to broadcast drug references into American living rooms." Jim stood up, swaying slightly. He was taller than Ed expected, over 6 feet. "You know what I think, Ed. I think you're scared. I think you're terrified that rock and roll is changing, that the world is changing, and you can't control it anymore. You had Elvis, you had the Beatles, and you thought you could tame them, make them safe for middle America. But you can't tame us. We're something different. Ed felt anger rising. You're a kid from Venice Beach who got lucky with one hit song. Don't lecture me about what I can and can't control. You either change that lyric or you don't perform. It's that simple. Jim laughed. Is it though? You already announced we're on the show. Your ratings depend on us being here. What happens if we walk out right now? What do you fill that time slot with? Ed realized he was being backed into a corner. Jim Morrison was right. Canceling the doors 6 hours before showtime would be a disaster. Jim, I'm trying to help you here. You change one word, you do the show, you reach 50 million people, and your album sales go through the roof. Why would you jeopardize that? Jim walked to the edge of the stage and looked out at the empty audience seats. You know what this place is, Ed. It's a temple where you decide who gets to be seen and who doesn't, who's acceptable and who's dangerous. But temples fall, and yours is falling right now. You just don't know it yet. Bob Precht rushed onto the stage. Jim, please. We're not trying to censor you. We're just asking for one small change. Is that really worth throwing away this opportunity? Jim turned to Bob. You want to know the truth? I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to say the word just to watch you all panic. Part of me wants to compromise because I'm not stupid and I know what this show can do for our career. And part of me wants to do something completely different, something none of you expect. He smiled again. I guess we'll all find out together in a few hours. Ed and Bob exchanged glances. This was a nightmare. They had no guarantee that Jim Morrison would follow their instructions, but they also had no backup plan. Jim, Ed said slowly, I need your word. I need you to promise me that you'll change the lyric, right now, or I'm pulling the plug. Jim stared at Ed for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. You have my word, Ed. I'll handle the lyric exactly the way it needs to be handled. It wasn't the firm commitment Ed wanted, but it would have to do. He shook Jim's hand and walked away, that sick feeling in his stomach getting worse. At 7 p.m., the audience started filing into Studio 50. The doors were scheduled for the second segment, right after a comedy act. Ed did his opening, introduced the comedian, and then during the commercial break, he looked over at the doors waiting in the wings. Jim Morrison was wearing tight leather pants and a black shirt. He looked sober now, focused, almost predatory. Ed walked over to him one last time. Jim, tell me you're going to do the right thing. Jim looked at Ed with those strange, intense eyes. Ed, I'm always doing the right thing. The question is, right for who? Before Ed could respond, the stage manager was counting down. Back in 5, 4, 3. Ed rushed to his mark. He introduced the doors with his usual formal style, and the band walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. They launched into Light My Fire. Ray Manzarek's keyboard intro was hypnotic. The drums built tension, and then Jim Morrison grabbed the microphone and started singing. Ed watched from the wings, his fists clenched. The first verse went fine. The second verse approached. This was it. This was the moment where Jim had to say better instead of higher. Jim Morrison looked directly at the camera, that predatory smile spreading across his face. He leaned into the microphone and sang clear as day, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." He didn't just say it, he emphasized it. He made sure every person watching knew exactly what he was saying. The control booth exploded into chaos. The director was screaming into Ed's earpiece. He said it. He said higher. What do we do? Ed's face went white, then red. He wanted to storm onto the stage and stop the performance, but they were live. 50 million people were watching. He was trapped. Jim Morrison kept singing, and now he was moving, swaying, going into that shamanic trance state he was famous for. He'd made his choice. He'd looked Ed Sullivan in the eye, shaken his hand, given his word, and then deliberately, defiantly broken that promise on live national television. The song ended. The audience applauded, not knowing the crisis unfolding backstage. The Doors walked off stage and Ed was waiting for them. His face was a mask of fury. What the hell did you just do? Jim Morrison smiled. I performed our song, the real version. The one people actually know. You gave me your word, Ed said, his voice shaking. You looked me in the eye and promised. No, Jim said calmly. I said I'd handle the lyric exactly the way it needed to be handled, and I did. That lyric needed to be sung the way it was written. Changing it would have been a lie. Bob Preck stepped between them. Jim, you just got the Doors banned from this show forever. You understand that? You'll never perform here again. Jim shrugged. Your show is dying anyway. In 10 years nobody will remember Ed Sullivan, but they'll remember the Doors. They'll remember this moment. When rock and roll stopped asking for permission, Ed pointed his finger at Jim. Oh! Get out of my studio, now, and you can tell every other band in America what happens when you cross Ed Sullivan. You're done. The Doors left. Jim Morrison never looked back, and Ed Sullivan had to go back on stage and finish his show, knowing that he just lost control, that a 24-year-old singer in leather pants had challenged his authority and won. The next morning, CBS was in crisis mode. The switchboard was flooded with calls, but they weren't all complaints. Young people were calling to say they loved what Jim Morrison had done. Parents were calling to say they were horrified. The story made front-page news. Morrison defies Sullivan's censorship. Ed issued a statement. The Doors will never appear on the Ed Sullivan Show again. And they never did. But Jim Morrison was right about one thing. That moment became legendary. It became the symbol of the cultural divide in America, the moment when the counterculture stopped pretending to play by the establishment's rules. The Doors' album sales exploded after the Sullivan Show controversy. Light My Fire went back up the charts, and Jim Morrison became more than just a singer. He became a symbol of rebellion, of refusing to compromise, of choosing artistic integrity over commercial success. Ed Sullivan never spoke publicly about Jim Morrison again, but people close to Ed said the incident haunted him. It was the moment he realized the world had changed and his power to control it was slipping away. Jim Morrison died in 1971 at age 27, but that moment on the Ed Sullivan Show, when he looked into the camera and sang higher with that defiant smile, lived on. It's been studied in film schools, written about in books, analyzed as the moment when television lost its power to censor rock and roll. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. The story of Ed Sullivan and Jim Morrison reminds us that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to compromise on who you are. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and being true to yourself? Share your story in the comments below.